This is Roman with April's Russian budget analysis. So, as you can see in the April headlines, the Russian budget deficit hit $45 million, exceeding the full year target. Their target is in rubles, it was 2.9 trillion rubles, and it's already 3.4 trillion rubles, which translates to roughly $45 billion, depending on the day's exchange rate. And before you say, oh, $45 billion is not that much, look at the US deficit. Well, the Russian economy is roughly 20 times smaller than the US economy. It's estimated to be the annual GDP is around $1.5 trillion, at least before this war, while the US economy for 2023 is estimated to be between 26 and $27 trillion. So, yeah, multiply this 45 billion by a factor of 20 and you're looking at $900 billion in the first 4 months of the year in terms of your annual deficit. So just to give you some context there, and also keep in mind that nobody wants to lend to Russia right now, whereas US, at least for the time being, is considered one of the safest places to park your money. So $45 billion for Russia in the first 4 months is a big deal. So even though it's interestingly, this hasn't really been picked up by major newspapers. I think Bloomberg is one of the few that kind of gave this any notice. But this is kind of a big deal, and let's look into how this is happening and look at it, break it up by monthly numbers as we have in the past. So let's go to our dashboard for folks that haven't seen it. We're looking at seasonal patterns. So we're looking really apples to apples for the months since the oil embargo and oil price cap have been put into effect, which is December of 2022. And we'll see that this is really when the big deficit started. So as you'll see here, December 2022 was a very difficult month for the Russian budget balance, $54 billion in the red. And now that we're tracking 23, we'll start with January. And yet, as you recall, in March, they actually had a positive fund balance, but it was surplus. And it was kind of a surprising development. But now we're back on this program. So for April of 2023, we're seeing a monthly $13 billion deficit. Again, kind of depending on which conversion rate from ruble to dollar you want to believe. But let's conservatively say $13 billion deficit in April. And now the question is, okay, so what's going on? Why was there this little bump in March? What's going on with April? And I want to bring back a graph that I used last month, which was provided by Janis Kluge, a German analyst focused on the Russian budget. He's excellent. I'll drop a link for him for his Twitter account. Very much worth a follow. So let's see kind of the seasonal aspects of Russian budget revenue, and we see that in the first 3 months, historically, there's been a bit of a pickup from January into March in terms of the blue, which is the non-oil revenue, and the red, which is the oil revenue. So we see historically the non-oil revenue picked up, and March was a really good month for that source of revenues. And then when it comes to oil, there's not much seasonality to it, but as you can see, the 23 revenues for oil are significantly lower than the 22, which is certainly to be expected. And this is what we're seeing in the data again. And when you look at the historical performance, at least last year, April non-oil revenue had a pretty noticeable drop compared to March, and then got bailed out by the massive oil revenues. And as you recall, back in March and April of 2022, there was a shock to the system from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and oil prices spiked significantly as a result of that shock. And Russia was making, a lot of money from the sales of oil and gas to Europe at that time, which is certainly no longer the case. So you'll see that in the past, the April revenues have dropped. So I'll use one more chart from Janis that now has April data, and you'll see that there is a drop from March to April non-oil revenues as well. And once again, oil revenues are certainly underperforming compared to last year. And this is certainly also reflected in my dashboard. You can see that oil revenues are right around that $8 billion mark for the last 2 months, up from the previous 2 months, but certainly below what it was in 2022 when the revenue was $24 billion. So you're seeing this heavy impact on the Russian revenue collections as a result of these oil sanctions, of these gas sanctions, of the European market essentially no longer being viable for Russia and having to resort to discount sales to China, India, and other partners that they have to seek out elsewhere who know that Russia is dealing with that oil price cap and a price cap on oil products as well. Moving on to revenue compared to expenditures, which is how you identify the source of the budget deficit or surplus. You will see once again that in April, as you would expect, the revenues are below the expenses by $13 million. And it looks like these expenses have kind of plateaued a little bit as the war economy takes hold. They're very similar to the expenses from 2022, and you'll notice they're significantly higher than by $12 billion than the expenses of 2021. And this is what you would expect. Wars are expensive, and the Russian budget has to cover that somehow. The difference, of course, and the reason why there's a deficit in 2023 versus 2022 is that the revenues are down, and the main driver of that, as we've seen, is the reduction in oil revenue. So the last graph I want to look at is the spending side of things. We've looked at revenue quite a bit. Let's look at the seasonal aspects of spending. And what we are seeing here is, first of all, you can see the spending compared to the previous 4 years is up every month of this year. Again, unsurprisingly, even compared to last year. January was a big bump, and we're seeing those numbers carry on. So what can we expect going forward? I think there's a big question of what is going to be the annual budget deficit for the Russian budget. What can we expect for the full calendar year? And I think there's some estimates that they're stabilizing. They're not going to exceed this 2.9 trillion ruble target too badly moving forward because their budget is stabilizing. And I mean, I personally think it's way too early to say that, right? I think May will be an interesting month because historically it's been a month where the expenditures go down. Even last year, the expenditures went down. And then you can kind of see a pattern pick up through July. And December is an interesting month, and I wonder if there's been any explanation somewhere from other more knowledgeable sources why December is such a big expenditure month. But you'll recall that last year, the entire deficit for that year was basically driven by the December expenditures, which were massive, right? Let's just go back to 2022, and you see $95 billion expenditure just in that 1 month. So I think we're going to see that again this year. There's obviously their needs for spending for the war economy and maintaining other social services and infrastructure services have not gone away. So we can expect another massive month of December this year. So they're already at $45 billion. Let's say they just conservatively have a repeat of last December, and they have another, let's say, $50 billion deficit in December again. So you're already at $95 billion. And this assumes that every single other month, their budget is balanced and they don't have any more deficits, which I think is completely unrealistic. So what I would expect to see based on what we're seeing so far and this historical performance is that the oil prices are what they are. Even though if you look at the oil prices for the month of April, it was actually relatively speaking for Russia, it was a pretty good month. The Euro's oil was over $60 for most of the month, which is better than it's been for the last 3 or 4 months. And you still saw that the revenues were down. We're expecting it to stay this way and maybe even get a little bit worse. So I think what we can expect is future months where the deficits are, I don't know, between the $5 and $10 billion mark per month, and then another difficult December for Russia when I guess their bills come due and they have to to really increase their expenditures. If I was to project, I would project, conservatively speaking, that the Russian budget deficit will be somewhere between 130 and 150 billion dollars for the year, and how they're gonna cover that gap is an interesting question that we should probably explore in a separate video. But let's say $150 billion deficit. Again, keep in mind that the Russian economy is about 20 times smaller than the U.S. economy. $150 billion deficit equates to a $3 trillion deficit for the U.S., which even by U.S. standards is a very, very bad year. And keep in mind that nobody wants to buy Russian debt. So they'll probably make it through the end of the year in terms of their existing reserves and perhaps coercing their population to buy government bonds. But they are in a world of hurt, and it continues to be the case. And even though last month they saw a slight surplus, we can see, just based on the patterns we just reviewed, that the Russian budget is going to continue to struggle. And it's going to, sooner or later, start affecting their war effort, which, as of this date on May 13th, we're seeing is not doing so great as it is. And I expect it to continue to do worse and worse as the budget deficit takes hold. Thank you for your time. And please take a look at the bottom of the video description for opportunities to donate to Amicus Ukraine. That's an organization I'm volunteering with. They bring cars from Lithuania into Ukraine. They're actually in Lithuania right now, and we're also going to try to bring in some diesel trucks from the U.S. It's a bit of a lift logistically, but we're going to try it and see what happens. Thank you for your time, and hope you have a good rest of your day.